How's it going, everybody? I am Mark Jackson from Source ADV, and behind me, right here, is a Zero DSR Black Forest edition that just survived 1,000 miles of Colorado Rocky Mountain adventure travel. We did it with two of these with Electric Cycle Rider, and you can watch that whole adventure here by going over to Electric Cycle Rider's channel and subscribing to his channel and subscribing to my channel. But if you want to go for a ride-along review of this bike and compare it to a KTM 1090 Adventure, which was the last bike that I did the Colorado BDR on, this bike has clearly seen some really hard miles. I am actually super impressed with this bike. But first, let's talk about the big elephant in the room. How did the range thing work out? Well, let's go up to the road and check it out, and I'll talk you all through it. It actually did pretty darn well, and we didn't have to use a generator. Wink, wink. Some people who've watched some other documentaries know about that. And we actually almost entirely, for the whole adventure, used just standard charge points with just two RV charge stations. But first, let's do a sick burnout with an electric bike.
Oh, you got all dusty, little camera. Oh, did it hurt? All right, let's just hammer down with some dirt. That's a lot of torque, guys. Just lighten up the rear tire. Ew. You actually really do have to be careful with this thing in sport mode on loose ground, because it will kick the rear down so fast that you won't even know what happened. It's like riding kind of like an old 500 two-stroke or something like that. It really just opens up. One of the things with this bike is that the power is really fun, but when you start being a hooligan and using it, it really does burn battery astronomically fast. So we're at 95%. It literally just clicked to 95%. I'm in sport mode, and I'm going to show you how fast you can get down to 94%. Let's do this. Woo!
All right, so let's get right to it. Essentially, in this style of riding, the bike burns through about 1% battery life in 55 seconds. And we actually found that the bikes burn a lot more battery life when you're just holding like a 75 mile an hour and 80 mile an hour speed, which makes a ton of sense because air resistance as a force goes up exponentially. But what does that boil down to in adventure style riding? Well, if you can hold an average speed of around 45 miles an hour, it basically means that you have 1 mile per 1% battery life, and that's all you need to know. It's actually pretty straightforward, and you get used to it after about 4 days. The range anxiety does kind of go away until you add weird weather or slippery conditions, or you have to do a lot of highway miles. Keeping an average speed of 45 miles an hour is pretty rough, actually.
This bike is really fun to ride, so it's a real challenge with the bike. So, as I said in the test, you know, what this translates to in adventure riding is that whenever you're doing a highway connector, that happens a fair amount on the BDR, you know, any type of connecting route where you have to get on something fast, you have to go 45 to preserve your range. And that means you're getting passed by tractor trailers and all sorts of other cars on these two-lane highways, especially here in Colorado where there are two-lane highways, literally a road like this where people are going 75 miles an hour.
The most common question we would get, besides what is the range on the bikes on this trip, is what's it like to charge? So this particular Zero DSR has their charge tank option, which allows it to take a J-style automotive charger. There are publicly available J-style automotive chargers all over the place, whether it's through ChargePoint or at municipalities. And for this particular bike to go from roughly, 10% to 100%, we were getting average times of 90 minutes to 120 minutes. So as long as you're okay with hanging out for 90 minutes at a charging station, which might not necessarily be by anything, well, then you'll be just fine doing this style of adventure riding, and you can get a 200-mile day with 2 charges. One of the really good things about charging a Zero DSR is that in total we spent about $7 per bike to do the whole 1,000-mile trip. That's pretty crazy.
What else is the Zero DSR good for? Well, if you would like to meet middle-aged men, the Zero DSR is fantastic. Okay, so I'm just about to enter downtown Boulder, Colorado. This is the perfect place to find a middle-aged male friend who might be into electric bikes. Hello.
Is that electric?
Oh, this bike? Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah.
Like, it's not screaming. Wow, that's tight.
It's pretty quiet, right?
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, we just did 1,000 miles on them from Four Corners to Wyoming border, all off-road. That's why this one's pretty...
Like with the electric engine, is the faster acceleration.
But you have to run it in eco mode the whole time to get the range.
Right, or you could burn yourself out.
Yeah,
How far did you, like that 1,000 miles? Like what's the range on it?
100 miles,
Okay.
roughly, yeah. How's it going?
I didn't hear you come in.
Oh yeah, electric bike.
Nice.
Yeah, man, it's pretty cool.
That's the other thing. I guess people in general tend to be a little bit more like smiley when you're on this bike. They definitely, you know, are more open and receptive to the electric bike than the very loud, big KTM 1090. They don't seem to hate you as much, which is cool. You know, of course, motorcycle guys and you know, a lot of guys are okay with the very loud, you know, destructive, explosive bikes. I love them. You know, I'm one of those guys that hears a bike go by and goes, oh, what's that? But this thing is just a lot more friendly in general, and that's kind of nice in some way.
So one of the other things that I really struggled with this bike on this adventure was the ergonomics for some reason are just a little funky. And maybe it's just because I'm 6'1", but when you're standing up, I really had to be leaning way far over, almost like a, you know, almost like a tack position on a dirt bike. But, you know, for adventure riding, I kind of wanted to be more straight up and just kind of standing comfortably. But instead, I'm way far over. I've got really bent knees and I'm kind of crouched and leaning forward. And then sitting down, my knees were super, super bent. And what that did was just make me a little bit more tired. Ow. Also, you'd think on a $20,000 bike, the seat would be comfortable. The seat is like, it looks really comfortable, but it's literally like a piece of plywood. My last dislike of this bike is that the combination of the 19-inch front wheel and the big fat TKC 80 tire and the short suspension travel, when things get pretty darn rough, you know, it's just not enough. I probably bottomed this bike out maybe 500 times over 7 days, and that's not an exaggeration. Literally 500 times, okay? And keep in mind too that this is a media bike. This is a bike that's given out to guys like Revzilla and Jalopnik and, you know, people that are literally beating the crap out of this bike. And by the time we got it, it already had 2,600 miles on it. So, you know, it had had a really rough life, but I actually bottomed the bike out and ended up tearing the luggage rack system mount right off the back of the bike, right out of the subframe. And so I'm not holding that against Zero. I think that might be a function of how rough this bike has had it. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind that, you know, with a bigger front wheel and some more suspension, this bike would really do a lot better. Ooh, there's one of those bottoms. Here, I'll get at the bottom for you again. This is just a regular bottom. Oh, front and rear bottom. Oh, God, that feels fantastic. And I would love to see a 21-inch front wheel on this thing. You know, just to make it roll over things a little bit easier. Oh, God damn. That is not, let me be clear. That is not a huge trench I just went through. That was something that was this deep, and I'm doing 20 miles an hour. My KTM 1090 would have just eaten that up on the BDR. I could have just wheelied over that, and it would be totally fine. So it really is something to consider when you're looking at this thing as a BDR style bike, where you're going to actually run into some real rough off-road terrain here and there. You know, it's just not there yet, okay? Oh, God, every time. Like I said, 500 times over 7 days. 500 times. You know, at the end of the day, what it boils down to is for any like kind of rough American West terrain, even this Switzerland trail, even if this is like your local bop around town bike, I would much rather have a 21-inch front wheel with a slightly narrower tire so that I could actually get traction in mud, because we ran into a few situations where it was like this clay mud, and
We also figured out that the regenerative braking in eco mode locks the back tire in mud.
you'll see it in the documentary. This bike was just all over the place. So I'd much rather have that 21-inch front wheel, a little bit more raked out front end for a little bit more stability, and 2 to 3 inches more suspension travel for this rough stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can still have fun on this thing on rough stuff. It just feels like you're beating the bike up a bit too much. So yeah, like outside of the range issue on this bike, I actually really do like the powertrain. I like not having gears. I like the simplicity of it all. I like the torque. I like how you can change the modes, and those are very, very different modes. Eco mode, you really can't get yourself into trouble. You can kind of just do whatever you want, hammer down, and it'll just kind of like nicely accelerate you forward. You really can't mess it up, honestly. Whereas like sport mode on an off-road situation, you can really get out of control pretty quickly. The torque, that 140 something foot-pounds of torque, really does come into play. But with that, the bike is just a lot simpler. There's really nothing you can break other than the belt. Everything else, if you happen to break it, like, you're probably out of luck. But with that, like, there's a lot less maintenance. So if you're like a less mechanically inclined rider, you can hop on one of these things and just teach yourself how to change a belt and get the charging stuff down and use all the adapters, and that's pretty much it. Check your tire pressure, change tires, lubricate your wheel bearings. That's about it, It's pretty crazy. So there is something really cool about how simple it is. I think on the whole adventure, we literally didn't do anything other than change the belt, which was after the adventure was done, because Tucker was doing a burnout and we dug the rear tire into the ground and it snapped the belt. That was it. Pretty darn cool. And like I said, the power here is just so much fun. It's so smooth. You can just roll it on really easily. Oh, Jesus. Or you can launch yourself into some Jeeps like that. Hey, now. That was fun. So one of my big likes about this bike is the magic carpet ride feeling when the roads are smooth and you're right in that sweet spot of 30 to 60 miles an hour. This thing just kind of puts you in this place where you're just kind of floating through stuff. The suspension in the bike and how it turns when the road is grippy and smooth and is really, really nice. And I keep calling it my wilderness magic carpet ride. That's the only way I can put it. It's just, you're just kind of with nature, and the loudest thing is actually the wind noise on your helmet, and probably the wind noise on this GoPro. So that's pretty darn cool. So you might be thinking, like, who is this bike for and what could it do really well right now? Well, if you did live in kind of a destination progressive area that has stuff close by, like Boulder, for instance, or even the East Coast or California. I say progressive because you'll have access to a lot of charging stations, but destination because you kind of want to stay within 100 miles a day of things, right? So, if you were living somewhere where, for instance, you could drive up to Estes Park living in Boulder, or you could drive up to, you could get to Red Feather Lakes, for instance, from Boulder, and then charge off of an RV station. You really could use this for kind of fun 1 to 2 day trips, as long as you had the time to do so, and the flexibility to kind of work with the variables to not just kind of evacuate or eject yourself out of a bad situation. If you can do that, this bike is actually really darn cool. So the big question that's on everybody's mind, is it time to just sell all your gas bikes and go full electric, get a Zero? Well, honestly, I don't think the answer is that simple. The problems that I had with the Zero DSR actually were more on the suspension and wheel size and ergonomics side of things. Those are the real issues that I had with it for like an adventure bike for my type of travel. Once you got used to the 100-mile range, you just kind of get used to that and you plan your adventure accordingly. And the idea of finding another charge station is part of the adventure travel in itself. And you also get to sit there and possibly, you know, hang out in a town that normally you just fill up and blast through. So that's one of the things that I really like about the electric bike, is that it does give you a little bit more time to enjoy your environment. Now, the downside is that a lot of the charging stations today aren't in the places you actually want to be. They'll be at like some municipality on the other side of town, and you kind of just got to hang out there. And there's nothing in walking distance, but that will be changing very soon, right? There's more and more charging stations going in everywhere. So the answer is not that simple. You know, if I had to have just one bike, would it be a Zero DSR? Well, that answer is simple, and that's a no. You know, there are certain things that it just can't do for me. I'm more of the kind of get out there in the remote on the lightweight bikes right now, you know, go try something way more technical. And the Zero DSR is just not a technical riding bike. It's more of an adventure touring bike right now, especially because of that suspension. Now, if they came out with, you know, something that was like a KTM 1090 and had that 21-inch front wheel, a bunch of suspension travel with a 100-mile range, that would make things a lot more difficult to decide. But, you know, as it sits right now, it's close. If I was the type of person that could have 5 bikes in the garage versus just one, the Zero DSR would probably be one, honestly. It's that much fun, and it's that unique and that novel of an experience that it is a bike worth having, even though its price point is incredibly high. So yeah, I think the point is that it's really, really close, and that part is really cool. It's so awesome to kind of see the future of technology manifesting in our society, you know, and it's getting better and better every year, and all these electric companies are putting in more charging infrastructure. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but it's really close. So I mean, if you can get yourself out there on one and try a ride, it's a really cool experience. That's it for me. Thank you for tuning into Source ADV. I hope you had a great time watching this review. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to ask down below. I'm really good about getting back to people. Please subscribe to my channel. The next big build is going to be taking this 2020 KTM 500 XEFW and turning it into kind of this do-it-all bike. It's kind of the antithesis of the five bikes per person model, which is that if you had to have one bike, that was it, and you wanted to do single track riding, some racing, and you wanted to do lightweight adventure riding, could you do it all with just one bike with swapping some parts out? So that's where this thing's going right now. It's all set up for single track riding and racing as it currently sits, but we got to get that adventure side of things worked out too. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your watch, and enjoy the ride out there. Take care.